Hello and welcome back to the 100-day art challenge. If this is the first video of mine that you're watching, then just know that this is part of a playlist. So if you go to the playlist on my channel, you'll be able to see that there should be eventually 99 other submissions. But for now, I think this is going to be somewhere in the early 30s of my submission. I'll have it labeled in the description box which number this one is. And I've been working on smaller and smaller pieces of cardboard, so the last few have been these tiny squares, and it's pretty small. I've drawn smaller in the past and I've done smaller portraits in the past, but for this series, because it's using oil pastels and obviously, as you can see here, using ink, it's quite a small surface. These last few have been female subjects that I'm using for the model of the piece. They are from an Instagram account called Earth's World. I will credit those in the description and show them on screen now. And if you check them out, then I think they're great for a resource and inspiration to use if you want to try out portraiture. Just give them credit in the description and shout them out, because that's the decent thing to do. This person is someone who's got quite a bit of character, and they stood out to me, and a lot of the Earth's World portrait photography does, but certain ones speak to me more because of there's something slightly unique about certain portraits, to me anyway. Not to downplay the others, but I think certain faces just appeal to me more, and with this character it almost feels reminiscent of certain fictional characters I've seen on the big screen, so there's something quite cinematic to them, and it should become apparent when it starts to develop who I might mean with this, but yeah, several of the characters I think remind me of people I've seen in films, and I always enjoy seeing that in real life. I think that a lot of the best cinema is inspired by true personalities that the filmmaker has come across. And just like with the last video I uploaded, this one starts with the importance of the hair and the outline shape, so the negative space around the subject, and then trying to get the loose proportions down with ink first. They're always quite wispy and loose, but they show me just enough information that I need. Now with noses, I don't always do that shape, and you see that shape I've got down for the nose. That will be because of the angle of the subject. Because she has her head tilted downward, it shows the nose in a way which I think is important to show the actual 3D shape that it has on the face, how much space it takes up and where it sits with the eyes and with the mouth, and just so that I can plot it out to the point where I'll be comfortable applying colour later on, knowing that it is fairly accurate, or enough so that I can push into this portrait with some more expressive colour and try to describe something which I think is lively and interesting, even if the character is in a moment of stoicism, which it looks like this character may be. Certainly more serious than other characters that I have described in my portrait studies for this challenge. This is quite a serious looking individual, but I like that little twist of the hair, and I don't always draw this much detail. Some can be very vague, but for things like this, because they're so small, I think it's just to help with the direction that I'm going after this point. If I'm going to cover up a lot of this with colour, then I want to make sure that what I've plotted down in ink is securing enough information accurately to go full speed ahead with some really interesting mixes, and try to make it as engaging as possible, even if it's not the most accurate with the source material. And I try to get somewhat accurate, but I'm not trying to do a like-for-like comparison with the photographs. Instead, I'm trying to capture what's interesting to me, heighten certain aspects, and keep others fairly grounded. And then these shapes at the back where the hair comes out is again really nice shape for the outline of the character. So if this was just a silhouette, you'd be able to see those bumps and the the shape of the top of the hair, along with the cheekbones on the side, the cigarette popping out, and the shoulders. I think it all has quite a bold and interesting outline, and things like that are part of the appeal for me, is to try and see if the outside shape, just in the basic broad strokes, would be interesting and engaging, and then anything that I can capture inside of that from a non-silhouette point of view is obviously what I'm trying to heighten and create with the oil pastels, because they're the parts which really show where the curves are on the face, where the light hits the face. And a lot of art making is where the light is and where the shadows are. But I also think just as important is to try and capture points of texture. Where you can describe texture on a portrait, a landscape or a still life, I think that does as much as tonality or shape design. Those three things to me are probably the three most important parts of all art making, especially in the figurative realm. Even though I can imagine with a lot of abstraction it's similar. I'll have to give that some thought, but just at passing thoughts, I really appreciate a lot of abstract artists who capture those three things also. With abstract art, you're obviously not looking at anything that you can identify, but if you squint your eyes, you can see the big darks and lights pop out, and that's what makes these things engaging in my view. And then the shapes are what have this darker or lighter tone, and then the textures are what create the contrast between the flats and the more speckled or rough, or the noise that you can create on the surface. And those, again, being the three important things to me for figurative work, I think are also very important for abstraction. But there we are, there could be good examples where that's not the case for both abstraction and for representational art. So I'm open to be shown otherwise, but I think for the time being I'm comfortable saying those are the three pillars of great art making in my view. This is not going to be necessarily great art making, but it's certainly going to be something fun and where I use a lot of my knowledge and experience to make something speak to the person that I'm looking at in a photo reference for such a small study that I'm making here. And the medium brown is a nice way to start off the hair. It depends how you want to blend the colours together. A lot of the time I will talk about how I start with the darkest colour first, but it does depend on what I'm looking at. So if I'm looking at something where it has highlights but the majority is dark, then sometimes I'll put the highlights on first so that I can cut into those first few marks with the darker colour in order to make the majority darker and the highlights become more obscured but still sit comfortably underneath the majority of the darker space. So I think I'm trying to retain some of these curls that swoop back along from the front of the hair along to the back, and yet try to introduce darker colours to make sure that it has some volume to the shape. And again, as I've done before with the brown, you can do two browns if you like, which I've tried to do there, but I'll also use some black. And the black is a much smaller oil pastel, but it's very powerful when used with the darker tones because it describes parts of the hair that aren't catching the light, and it just creates this shape which was otherwise a lot flatter without this tonal range. And that's what the black is for, really. It's not necessarily for the colour, even though it works on that level to heighten the colours around it, but for the tonal range it has the advantage of creating a light source and certain areas of shadow. And as you can see, I used it for the eyes and the eyebrows as well, just to get something loose down straight away. As I said earlier, I like to start with the darker colours when it comes to parts of the portrait. That's what I'm doing here, but I'm scrubbing it on, so I'm doing it very broadly instead of pointing it down. So in other words, I will flatten the oil pastel and scrub it down the surface. that's why it has this speckled appearance. That will be based on what the light looks like, but I want enough of it on the surface that when I apply this pink, it will mix with the brown underneath it and alter the tonality and the texture which I am capturing on the face. And I have to be careful picking around this because there are several parts of this portrait which are important, and if I go too fast, too loose with how I'm describing the person, then I will lose certain parts of the character and the delicacy, which is what makes up the personality on the surface. But I do really enjoy oil pastels for how nice it already looks, I think. I mean, the pink I think really sits well on the surface and looks nice with the brown of the hair. And now trying to introduce what looks like a mid-yellow, an orangey yellow, can be a really nice combination, because when you look at such a small portrait and it has these different colours describing the planes of the face, that can be far more interesting and engaging an image. Oh, it looks like it's a light pink, sorry. Sometimes it's harder to identify the colours that I'm using because of how briefly you see them, and because of how small the surface is, my fingers obscure what colour it is that I'm using. And this was probably June or July when I was making these portraits, I'm not sure, quite a while ago, and now just uploading the videos. But yeah, enjoying picking through it and describing the light already with these colours. So I have the darks down describing how much she is being backlit, so all the shadow is on the centre of the face, because a lot of the time with portraiture you will see the shadow being less central in the face. You'll have the light shining on the face, trying to highlight someone's face and features. But I quite like when faces are partly in shadow. It gives a real mood and sense of atmosphere to a drawing or painting like this. And as I said, it's something which I try to preserve as I go around and around with these different strengths of tonal colour. So as it comes together, they all work with each other, and the more you cover the surface, the more each colour is served by the other which has been applied. So with the hair, having that mid-brown, darker brown and then black means that I preserve the part which I haven't touched on the hair, as the light coming from the back and the side, hitting that right hand side. And then with the black going in for her top, and some of that will need work because I'm losing some of the detail for that strap going over her shoulder, just like with her top, so something needs to go into there at some point to try and make sure that that stands out a bit clearer than what it is when you just scrub black over the whole thing. But at the moment I'm trying to capture the light with this tiny little piece of white that I have left, and it's really nice to go in the last point after you've done all this dark shadow in this mid-tone, which is not especially dark shadow, but you know, the darker pink, the lighter pink around the edges, and then getting the white just a touch on the highlights around the edges can really make that edge pop and show the light, and how powerful that can look for atmospheric effect and to really give some dimension to the character where it otherwise would look a little bit flatter. But there will be other touches that need to go in to describe shadow as well. There are always little additional points where you can try to heighten the description of the contours of the face, and that's what I really try to pick throughout the portrait, is try to get to a certain point, and once it's there, what can I do to add more nuance to that section? And adding more lights to the right hand side, as you can see, shows that it's consistent with the light hitting the hair on the right hand side as well. And the white is good for that because it mixes in with the pinks that were already down, and it gives it that strength. This is that darker tone that I mentioned earlier, where you do little touches, and this is going to be just enough where it's not too dark. You just touch it around the lips and that will be just enough for the lips. And getting the black involved again here, and as much as you can't see what I'm doing, it will all be revealed in just a moment. It is unfortunate that I didn't, in hindsight, I would have moved the camera to a position on my desk looking across the actual surface so that you can see what I'm touching into, but it looks like I'm working on the eyes and eyelashes and getting something a bit more precise for that part of the face, and I'm quite happy with that. You don't need to do too much more to describe something which serves the piece more than if you had a greater amount of precision. I think keeping things loose does quite a lot for the interest and life that's captured in small pieces like this. Because I've done so many, when they all sit together, they really do have a nice life to them. And as I mentioned earlier, with the darker tones to go in for the important parts of where the face has different planes, trying to get down the jawline, parts of the cheeks and parts of around the eyes to describe different contours of the face. And this is what I really enjoy after the fact, is to look through the different colours and different marks that suggest parts of the skin and face which curve and collect parts of mid-tone shadow, not dark shadow, but that's why I call it nuance really, as opposed to anything too decisive. It just keeps it in that realm of reality, to me anyway, is to suggest something which is curving around and not capturing the light so directly. Now I'm hoping that this is what I'm working on, is the clothes, to try to create something a bit different, and it looks like I'm using the white to lighten the black that I put down, just to differentiate the strap on her shoulder, on her left shoulder on the right there, from the black shoulder that you can see on the right. And going in with more mid-tone, but it's dark mid-tone, and dark mid-tone is great for description, and it can just be for the slightest curve on the face, and it makes all the difference to me. It's perhaps invisible to everyone else, but I think that the more I can touch these parts of a portrait and try to honour what actually happens in my experience. In fact, it may have even been orange, it looks like, for the tip of the cigarette. Little touches like that I think make a lot of difference. And then again, trying to just scrub across certain parts of the portrait, as light should be brighter from the top to the bottom and get much dimmer towards the bottom of the portrait. I think I'm lightening up the forehead, and as much as there is shadow on the centre of the face, I don't think it's silhouetted or really darkening too much, so I think I'm just trying to create that gradation which is true to the light distribution theory, which you will see throughout all experience of looking at people in real life, is that things are lighter higher up and darker lower down, unless there's a natural light source or a reflection of some sort. Now I'm going to remove the piece now, because all of these crumbs and flakes that collect on the surface just need brushing off, and this is what happens every time I do one of these pieces, is I get so far and then I just need to remove all of these little bits off the top of the surface so that I can see it more clearly, and there she is. That, to me, I don't know if you guessed who it is that she reminds me of from cinematic history. It's quite a classic film, but I enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.